Sydney Mardi Gras is upon us, a time for the LGBT community to celebrate all things queer. From art to theatre to social events, Sydney's rainbow community will be having a gay old time, pardon the pun, for the next few weeks. The only problem with this is that a number of Mardi Gras events scheduled for this year are aimed at teenagers and children. Why? Joining me to help decipher that and more is women's rights campaigner Katherine Deves. Katherine, it is delightful to have you here on the show this evening. Have you been well?
I have, Daisy. Thank you so much for having me on your show again. It's great to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you as always, and I'm very keen to get your take on these particular issues. Now, as I mentioned, there are lots of activities advertised at the Mardi Gras Festival for little ones this year, including drag face painting and, of course, drag queen story hour. There's a queer formal and a dress-up party with a sexual health wheel for under 18s, with prizes and pronoun badge-making stations. How can this be considered child-friendly, especially when children as young as 12 are allowed to participate?
Mardi Gras is essentially a celebration of adult sexuality. And, you know, I have no problem with LGBT people advocating for their rights to have a street party to celebrate their sexuality, but it really must be kept to over 18. I mean, there are adult themes being introduced. As we know, say with the parade, there are people who are wearing very skimpy clothing, who are acting in very hypersexualized ways. And obviously we have the whole contingent of drag queens. And being the mother of 3 little girls, you know, I have no issue with drag, but keep it to the nightclubs, because I think when you have these people who are dressed as males, who are dressed in a parody of the worst excesses of, feminine sexual stereotypes, and they're being held up as some sort of a role model or example of womanhood, I really object to that. Because it does not send a good message to little boys and little girls. And I think it's just an exercise where they're now trying to indoctrinate children into this rainbow ideology. So while I have no objection to it happening, it really should be kept to the over 18s.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, Katherine, because I agree with you. I love Mardi Gras. I've been to Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is fun. The parade is gorgeous. They have great sort of theatre events and stuff. You're right. It's a wonderful celebration of adult sexuality, and yeah, absolutely. Let them. It's fun if you're an adult. My issue is, like, I've noticed that these child-friendly events don't seem to really have anything to do with the L, the G and the B. It's all about the TQ plus with the child-friendly events. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Oh, look, 100%. The LGBT movement has been colonised by the T and the Q. Now, T is essentially people who wish to be perceived as the opposite sex. Queer, in my view, is people who have issues with identifying themselves as lesbian or gay, or they're people who are straight who wish to be part of the rainbow community. And I think, in my view, in our societies here in the West, LGBT people have never been more celebrated, acknowledged, their rights with respect to same-sex marriage, etc., have never been so good. But that goodwill and that acceptance is absolutely being compromised by the demands that are coming from the TQ component. And I know that there are a lot of LGBT people out there who would wish to see a divorce between the LGB and the TQ.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I know them too. I talk to them. There are a lot of LGBT people, so lesbian, gay and bisexual for our viewers, who have had it up to the back teeth with the T and the Q infiltrating their ranks, so to speak, and sort of pushing themselves to the front because, as we know, the gay community worked really hard for a long time to overcome a stigma put upon them by genuine homophobes that they were pedophiles trying to recruit children, you know, which was a horrible, hateful thing to say and not true. And they worked for years to counter that stereotype and get their rights, get gay marriage and acceptance, etc. This TQ movement, I think it's actually eroding LGB acceptance, don't you? Especially when they have these kid-targeted events.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I mean, because to be gay or lesbian or bisexual, I mean, that is to do with your sexual orientation. You are oriented towards a person of the same sex, or in the case of bi people, both sexes. So when you look at the T, I mean, you've got a middle-aged male who's just blown up his marriage, he's alienated his kids because he wants to perform his cross-dressing fetish full-time, and then he starts identifying as a lesbian. I mean, that man is not a lesbian. So, you know, while they may perceive themselves as gender non-conforming, and we know that a lot of LGB are gender non-conforming themselves, there's really no crossover. I just don't understand how they've managed to so successfully ingratiate themselves into that movement, because I'm of the view it's doing real damage. And I mean, there's research that now shows that acceptance of LGB is declining, particularly amongst the youth and college-age kids, say, in the USA. And I would posit that it is because of the demands of the TQ, because when we hear that they are fighting for, you know, trans rights, essentially what they're asking for is for women to give up their rights, and it's just these rights are in conflict, and I just don't understand what they're doing in the movement, personally.
Yeah, it is. It's extraordinary how they've managed to gain such cultural power over the last sort of 5 years ago, which is a pretty short space of time. I think, though, it's because the trans movement has effectively cannibalized feminism. And feminism was so mainstream for such a long time. And then males came in, activist males. I don't mean people who are genuinely trans, but activist males came in and said, hey, we're women too. Accept us, please. And for some women, for some reason, women in the feminist movement bowed down and said, okay. How did they allow that to happen, Katherine?
Well, I think it, you know, goes back to that hashtag be kind. So you've got, you know, a few men who wish to be perceived as women, and they were given a bit of a hall pass or a leave pass to be able to come into sort of women's spaces because women felt sorry for them. But now we have men who are identifying as women coming into our sports, coming into our spaces, coming into any space that used to be formerly male-free, whether it be prisons, you know, miscarriage support groups, homeless women's support groups. And you do have men, predatory men, who will absolutely exploit that loophole. And oftentimes they won't even attempt to, you know, sort of look like a woman, but now they come into those spaces and women are terrified to push back on these men because they don't want to be perceived as transphobic, they don't want to be accused of a hate crime or vilified, or equally because it is a female-only space and there is a strange male there, they don't want to antagonise him because they don't know what he's capable of. So we've sort of allowed this, you know, exemption. And it's absolutely, we've opened the door and it's basically letting in the predators. So I think that when we look at this situation and you've got people who are pushing laws and policy to accommodate these men who wish to be perceived as women, they're suffering from a failure of imagination because they don't look at the worst possible way that could be exploited or weaponised. They tend to think, oh, no one's going to do that. No, we're not going to put rapists in women's prisons. Oh, no, you're not going to have some bloke with a, you know, pregnancy fetish showing up to miscarriage support groups. But inevitably, because we've allowed these men this exemption, they do come into these spaces and women are finding that they now cannot say no.
Yeah, it's totally spiraled out of control, and I'm not actually sure how we get control back. So well done, fourth wave feminists. It's a great job. Nice. Thank you for spoiling it for everyone. Now, Katherine, we have to talk about the equality legislation amendment, which is coming into New South Wales Parliament, specifically the LGBTQIA plus Bill 2023. It's due before the New South Wales Parliament soon. What will this look like if it is incorporated into New South Wales law?
This bill is a dystopian hellscape for women, children and families. It's anti-woman, it's anti-mother-baby dyad, it's anti-children, it's anti-family, it's anti-consent, it's anti-language. It is a dreadful piece of legislation. And, you know, there are a few components to this, but the main one is with respect to sex self-ID. So this means anyone can pop into their registry or pop online and change their sex on their birth certificate to not only the opposite sex, to whatever they want. It can be whatever word they want, provided it is not profanity and it's not symbols. So, I mean, this has ramifications for data collection, for long-term planning, etc. People are putting all manner of silly things on their birth certificate. But, of course, the worst part of this is any man can go in there and change his birth certificate to female, and women will now not be able to remove him from spaces where it matters that it is male-free. And further to that, it also encroaches upon family and parental rights, where children as young as 12 can go and change their sex on their birth certificate, and also one parent can change the sex of their child on the birth certificate under the age of 12. Now, I might add, to change a child's name, you need the consent of both parents, but here, of course, there's an exemption. So we have that component, and then further to that, there's also the surrogacy laws that Alex Greenwich is looking to relax so that New South Wales residents can go to other jurisdictions to engage in commercial surrogacy, which is arguably a human rights violation, and it's now recognised as such. It's recognised as human trafficking by the EU and many countries in Europe. And there's also a removal of the prostitution laws. So we know that when you decriminalise prostitution, the only people who benefit are the Johns, the traffickers, the pimps, the brothel owners, the women who are actually on their backs performing the service. They are absolutely harmed, because when those protections are removed, demand goes up. And we can see in Germany, where there are now millions of women trafficked to what is now referred to as the brothel of Europe, to be exploited in the flesh trade, who are bought from countries all over the world. So human trafficking is on the rise in Australia. So I absolutely condemn this bill in its entirety, and it must be struck down.
Very well said, Katherine Deves. And, you know, to independent MP Alex Greenwich, who decided to have a big-brained moment and put forth this bill under the guise of love and inclusion and tolerance. Well, darling, you really need to think things through a little bit better, don't you? My goodness. Oh, we have to leave it there, unfortunately, but Katherine, magnificent to have you on the show again, and can't wait to have you back on sometime very, very soon.
Thanks so much, Daisy. It was great to join you.
Just before we go, did you know that the Church and State Conference is back? The Church and State Summit is being held on the 8th and 9th of March, and you can get a 20% discount on your tickets using the code ADH20. Just go to churchandstate.com.au. And well, that's all we've got time for tonight on the Daisy Cousens Show. I do hope you've enjoyed the program as much as I've enjoyed hosting it. Make sure you tune in next week and every week for more of the latest news from around the globe. Coming up next, The Other Side Australia is back with Damien Coury. Good night, world. I'll see you next time.